Hello, welcome to a special screening of Inside Prometheus, a documentary film on the origins of the open source Prometheus project. My name is Chad Torben. I'm the executive producer at Speakeasy Productions, who was responsible for creating the film. At Speakeasy Productions, we bring to light the world of developers, moving them out of the shadows and into the hearts and minds of millions of people everywhere. Our mission is to leverage the power of film to drive understanding, participation, and adoption of open source projects. On this webinar, we'll talk a little bit about the film and how it came to be. Then we'll see the film in its entirety, around 25 minutes. Then we'll be joined by Chris Anderchuk, CTO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, who will share his views on the film and also the future of the Prometheus project. Inside Prometheus debuted at Prometheus Day at KubeCon Cloud Native Con in Detroit last month. For those of you in the room, I hope you're joining us again and watching the film for a second time, and hopefully we'll see some new things this time around. For those of you who have not seen the film or were not at Prometheus Day, I'm glad that you could join us today, and I hope you'll find the story interesting, whether you're familiar with the origin story or not. To help tell this story, we were able to enlist many of the founders and early players in creating the Prometheus project, which includes Julius Voles, Bjorn Ravenstein, and Richard Hartman, who continues to steer the community today. As many of you know, the project started at SoundCloud, and it took us, we got extra special permission to film in Berlin at the SoundCloud offices. So as you watch the film and you see shots in the office of Bjorn and Matthias Rampel, who currently still works at SoundCloud today on the project, that is all filmed in Berlin at the SoundCloud offices where it all began, which is very special for us, and we're very helpful and thankful to SoundCloud for letting us do that. These films are really a labor of love to make, and we really enjoy making them. Our next film will be focused on the open source project Envoy. We're hoping to debut that at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in Amsterdam in 2023, with more films to come. There's no shortage of great stories within the open source community, especially the cloud native community. Again, our goal is to inspire understanding, participation, and adoption of projects, but also those next great code contributors and next great projects. If you have an idea for a project, we hope you'll watch this film and get inspired to go out and build that project and to create. And if not build your own project, at least contribute to one of these projects. Our first film was Kubernetes, a two-part documentary on the origins of the project itself, which I hope many of you watched, and you can also see on the honeypot.io YouTube channel. I hope that film helped inspire many of you to contribute to Kubernetes or adopt Kubernetes, and we hope that the Inside Prometheus film will have the same effect on the community at large. So without further ado, please enjoy the film, and we'll talk to you after.
Julius interview, take one.
More and more of normal companies went into a state where they had fairly complex distributed systems. They were severely lacking troubleshooting skills.
The teams that used to have to deal with what is monitoring back then were just DIYing it up. You have these scripts people are running, everything's manual, and of course that means it breaks a lot.
We have more things to observe and more complex things to observe.
You have so many more machines, you have so many moving bits and pieces.
You ended up getting woken up to be told that one of your 200 servers is feeling slightly unwell. That was very, very annoying.
Or there was no system at this time in the open source space which could handle this.
Was either too simple and not powerful enough, too powerful but not scalable or too complicated for cloud native.
The world was at the brink of becoming very, very fragmented.
So the market was really ready for something that would be a focused project on a monitoring solution.
At the time, in 2012, I was still working at Google in Zurich. In Berlin, SoundCloud was just emerging as this really cool new startup in the music scene, having the aspiration of becoming the YouTube of sound. Had really great engineers as well, good dynamic culture, and just seemed like a fun place to work. I eventually made that jump to Berlin and joined at SoundCloud. Another ex-Googler, Matt Proud, had joined at the same time, and we noticed that SoundCloud had a bunch of issues when it came to reliability, latency of the website and all that. And we were having trouble really figuring out even where these problems were coming from.
The monitoring at the time could not keep up with instances coming and going all the time.
So we had hundreds of microservices and thousands of processes running on that cluster already, changing hosts, changing ports every day when developers rolled out a new revision.
Even finding out if you're up or down, if you're on 100 servers, then there's always a server down. It's usually not bad because your distributed system is designed for that. But you have to find out that it is broken. And once you know that, now you have to find out what is broken. And yeah, there was just no chance.
SoundCloud at the time already had built their own in-house cluster scheduler system. So this was before Docker even existed and then far before Kubernetes existed. So it was a very modern, dynamic, and always changing computing environment already. But it was very hard with the traditional tools to get insight into what is really happening in that cluster.
We were using StatsD and Graphite for metrics, but the integration between the two wasn't very good, so we could not really use metrics for alerting.
Graphite's database was not really built for this highly dynamic use case. So when there was an issue like a latency spike or spike of errors, we were unable to properly pinpoint it down to a specific process, or not knowing whether it is a specific process or the entire group of microservices.
People had started catching on to metrics as a base of monitoring, but there wasn't a good integrated system that could work with this.
The monitoring wasn't ready for that, right? So the technology was there, it was pretty immature in a way, but it worked.
In this more dynamic world, you needed a monitoring system that, first of all, integrates the world of alerting and time series, and then also have a more flexible data model that allows more dynamicism and that has, on top of it, a query language that allows for, flexible dashboarding, but also powerful and flexible alerting at the same time. So tying together the time series and the alerting use cases into one system.
Google was one of the front runners of the cloud native movement, right? Because they saw web traffic scale at a level none of us saw at first. And so they had to scramble and really figure it out. Borgmon was one example of them trying to wrestle with metrics data, with time series databases.
Matt Proud and myself had just both come from Google, and we were used to this one monitoring system called Borgmon at Google, which was used to monitor all kinds of different services and infrastructure at Google in a very flexible way. And we noticed that when we came to SoundCloud, that SoundCloud already had a very dynamic cluster scheduler internally. So at the time, we looked at the different available open source monitoring systems, and we were a little bit disappointed. They were not really great at tracking metrics in detail, especially in a constantly changing world.
There was a really, really strong need to do something about it.
So as kind of a hobby project initially, we just sat down in our free time and started building what eventually became Prometheus. It was a very big, ambitious project. We were trying to build a complete new monitoring system and paradigm kind of from scratch. So not only did we have to explain it properly to people who had never used such a system, but also build it. So I did initially have a lot of doubts whether this project would be worth it and whether it would succeed. We were not hired to build a monitoring system, we were hired to make SoundCloud more reliable.
SoundCloud is not a monitoring company. SoundCloud has a relatively small engineering team. We could only devote so many resources to developing something like Prometheus.
But we did draw out the little dependency map of what we actually needed to do our job. And we always ended up getting back to that. First, we need good visibility into what is happening in the systems. Otherwise, we cannot improve anything. A year in, Matt decided to leave SoundCloud and go back to Google. And then I was alone on Prometheus for a while, just pushing it forward. Gradually, new people joined the project as well. So for example, Björn Rabenstein also left Google, and I had known him already, and he got interested in what I was working on. So when he joined SoundCloud, he also started helping out with Prometheus pretty early on.
If I had been like the manager of Julius and Matt back then, I would probably not have approved the project, I guess, because it sounds like crazy. And it probably was crazy, and we might just have been lucky that it all worked out.
The building part had so many different components. So we had to build a proper time series database. We had to build a querying system on top of that. We had to build client libraries for people to actually get metrics out of their different processes and services and hosts. So it took a lot of faith initially, both from us and for some people who supported us, to believe that this, at some point could actually start coming together and start really making a difference where this project would be worth it.
The team that was building Prometheus started using it right away and very intensely.
We got the Prometheus server to a point where it started working pretty properly. We got the internal cluster scheduler instrumented with metrics so that people could see the CPU usage, memory usage, and so on of all the different processes and microservices. So giving them the first time really good insight into what is actually happening. And we built a dashboard builder back then called PromDash, because Grafana didn't exist yet. But I would say maybe 1 or 1.5 years in, we had enough of the things that really made Prometheus worth it coming together.
Adopting Prometheus internally was a gradual process.
We needed some internal alpha testers who were ready for a very raw experience. So we found a couple of teams that were willing to experiment with it and use it to monitor their own services. And they also gave us great feedback on what they actually needed and the pain points they still saw with the system. Then once we had that prototype together, we were optimistic enough that we could actually introduce this at SoundCloud and make it work properly eventually.
But we really only started pushing everyone to migrate when they started kicking over the Graphite server again and again, while trying to record all the metrics and all the details that our old monitoring stack could not handle. And we knew Prometheus could handle it.
I think everyone realized that this monitoring system was sufficiently different in every aspect to what came before, that it made sense to actually have this completely new system, and that it also works much better with a new kind of dynamic clustered computing world that we were going into.
We thought this is very helpful for what we are doing here, and it would probably be good if others used that. But we had no expectation that anyone, except perhaps a few ex-Googlers, and then very few very nerdy people might actually realize what we're doing here. So we had no expectation that this would change how the world is doing monitoring.
Before we went out there and publicly announced Prometheus, it was already open source.
We already threw it on GitHub on day 0, put it under an open source license, and just made it available to the world.
And there were a few people at a few companies who had already started contributing and had started using Prometheus in their own company in production.
I, as personally, wanted to go more, into this open source community than just, finding the issue and complaining, right? We were really heavy users of Prometheus, so why not helping the project and jump in and really steer that into the more reliable future, right?
I have personally seen that projects that emerge from end users tend to do really, really well.
So when we finally published Prometheus to the world, we wrote a blog post from the SoundCloud side, but also from BoxEver, which was another company that was already using Prometheus outside of SoundCloud. Two companies at the same time were releasing their blog posts saying like, hey, we are using this monitoring system and it's not only being used at SoundCloud at the moment. 1.5 weeks after our official announcement of Prometheus, someone who we still don't know to this day who it actually is, managed to get Prometheus onto Hacker News on rank 1 for a whole day. And that really turned on the lights for the project. We saw that really in our GitHub stars, in our chat channels, in our mailing lists, in the GitHub contributions. Just everything started shooting through the roof from that day on.
Yeah, I looked at Prometheus, I did a test run, and within literally hours I fell in love with this system.
In came this really focused, really strong project, and it just swept the crowd away.
It solves a real pain point for the industry. There are a lot of monitoring products out there, but only Prometheus was available as a free tool that really grappled with the challenges of dynamic, containerized, cloud-native applications in the early days.
Prometheus made it much easier to add metrics to our project.
It has a simple user interface, a single binary, and ease of deployment. And this has changed the entire way in which we approach, consume, and develop with our monitoring solutions.
For the first time in my life, I was able to have monitoring data. I could actually do math on this data.
People said, yeah, this really changed the way we monitor things and even the way we deploy our services.
Yeah, the Prometheus exposition format is unique in a way because it is, first of all, human readable. So without relying on any monitoring backend, you can take a look at the output and read it. It's an introspection and troubleshooting tool of itself.
Also, the pool model, it makes things much more reliable because suddenly those collections are telling you much more and it provides additional context, additional information. Try an opposite. Try ask those applications to push data to your monitoring solution. Now things are very, very tricky. You have to think about buffering, rate limiting, service discovery, and lots of complex stuff that ideally you don't need to worry about.
It gave people a different level of flexibility. And I think monitoring and troubleshooting is in a better place because of the Prometheus exposition format.
There was a lot of still ongoing growth, but also a lot of work. So we just put more and more work into making Prometheus more stable, more integrated with different systems, eventually having a 1.0 stable version and then a 2.0.
As Prometheus gained adoption, more services were instrumented with Prometheus metrics.
You can take any really open source solution, maybe Kubernetes, maybe MySQL, maybe MongoDB, and you will have Prometheus instrumentation for free. All things together, the adoption grown because of simplicity here.
They did it just at the time when cloud native was proliferating, was becoming was the new cool kid on the block. And suddenly your old monitoring technologies or techniques such as APM were falling short.
A lot of companies started seeing the value in Prometheus and started using it, both in startups and in larger companies.
So I became a end user and familiar with Prometheus at Uber, where we built a monitoring platform with Prometheus as a core that allowed us to build control mechanisms and end user configuration stories on top of that platform and focus on what really mattered to Uber.
So one weird thing was when the Kubernetes folks noticed us.
The Kubernetes people noticed that it was similar to the monitoring systems they were used to at Google. So they chose to support Prometheus-style metrics in all the different Kubernetes cluster components. That led to a world where Kubernetes supported Prometheus very well, but at the same time, Prometheus also supported native service discovery and data collection on Kubernetes. In the end, that led to great mutual support between the two systems. And when you were using Kubernetes, you were probably also using Prometheus in some fashion.
Within Google, they had Borg in the late 90s, early noughts, and they needed something to be able to monitor all this data, and they created Borgmon for it. And this pairing is replicated in the open source scene between Kubernetes and Prometheus.
If you want to claim there is a conspiracy, it really looks like it. Like Prometheus, Kubernetes are both like 10-letter words. They're both of Greek origin. Like Kubernetes is abbreviated K8S, Kates. You could abbreviate Prometheus P8S or Pates or something, I don't know. Their logos, they're all done, right? Like this blue and this orange, it's like perfect complementary colors. It really looked like these systems were designed for each other. And Matthias sometimes calls it like twins separated at birth. But yeah, it felt really like, okay, finally they get together. They always were meant to come together.
It filled a hole in Kubernetes. It filled it in a way that was very familiar to a lot of people, both in the Kubernetes project, but also to a lot of people in the industry who had used this model before.
I strongly believe that without Kubernetes, Prometheus wouldn't be as large, and vice versa, because without Prometheus, Kubernetes, you wouldn't be able to observe all the stuff which is going on within Kubernetes or through Kubernetes.
So Prometheus came in because observability monitoring becomes that much more important when your systems are loosely coupled. Teams are working on small pieces without talking to other teams. So you really need observability at that time. So hence, Prometheus was a great fit, and today it is one of the pillars of cloud native.
We really were looking for kind of a neutral home for the Prometheus project. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation was just being formed at that time, and the only project that was in there so far was Kubernetes.
So when I was talking to the Prometheus team about working with Weaveworks and Weaveworks adopting their product as part of our solution, I was also asking them what were their thoughts about a foundation for the future. I met someone called Craig McCluskey from Google who was working on the Kubernetes project. And Craig told me that he would like Kubernetes to be in a foundation so that it could be an industry asset and not just a company asset. And we talked about how the CNCF could come into existence. That's when I said to Craig, I think Prometheus would be a wonderful project for the CNCF's early days. And we agreed that would be one of the projects that we would try and recruit when the CNCF launched.
By handing off Prometheus to CNCF, we allowed the project to grow beyond the needs and the capabilities of SoundCloud.
Prometheus is truly a special project. It has had a very strong velocity over the years. They joined CNCF in 2016. And actually, I remember being in the observability space. I was working on distributed tracing. We saw Prometheus join CNCF, and we're like, wow, okay, we should try to join in too. So it was really like a stage setter.
The idea was to continue with Prometheus autonomy and its own roadmap, but support it with a more broad umbrella provided by the CNCF community, marketing, and other support.
We are grateful to have this project with such talented technologists in it, with so much usage across the world to be part of our ecosystem.
People now saw that the project was really independent, had a proper governance. It was associated with the other projects in that foundation, right? Kubernetes especially. The CNCF also just helped us in a lot of different ways, supporting our events like PromCon or Prometheus Days, but then also helping us with PR, helping us with cloud infrastructure funding, and just giving us advice along the way.
As an open source project, Prometheus has welcomed all kinds of folks to come and enhance it. And that, I think, brings more people, more ideas, and therefore a higher quality product.
Prometheus really defined a standard set of ways of collecting and consuming telemetry data with metrics and monitoring. And that meant that people could build on top of it and focus on their core monitoring problems.
All the time, people talk about standards. Standards are used in two different ways. Sometimes people mean standards like TCP, where everybody uses the same way to connect up a network. Another kind of standard is what we call a standard tool, or a de facto standard. It means commonly used popular tools that everyone should understand once they've reached a certain level.
If you look at it today, if you look at it already a few years ago, Prometheus is the de facto standard for metric-based monitoring.
Think about it, hundreds of projects today support this exposition format, and like each time I see a new project in the cloud native space especially, they have some Prometheus exposition format support.
Prometheus has retained a narrow focus. It does monitoring, it is a time series database with a querying language, and it does those things really well. It doesn't spread itself too thin. I personally also think that a lot of the original, the OGs, are still deeply involved. That is just awesome. It inspires many to join in. It brings this continuity to the project. And I see their passion when I see them at KubeCon, Cloud Native Cons, or at the Prometheus events, PromCons, and those folks care just as much today as they did 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and that's just wonderful.
I was surprised that it became so popular so quickly. I enjoyed the work so much here with my colleagues at SoundCloud. It didn't even feel like a challenge.
I had made the decision to roll this out for all the places where I would ever go, because it's just so much better than anything which was there before.
For all the people out there who are considering, what should I build? What would resonate? There are other parts of the cloud native application development process that are not commodified, that are not de facto standardized. Look at all those things and decide where you have the strongest inclination to build a successful project.
There are projects where it's trying to achieve everything, but it ends up achieving nothing because there's so much fragmentation. I think Prometheus community and the core kept it very straightforward, kept it very simple, but yet achieved to build that like really big, ecosystem around the project.
We are still actively developing Prometheus, just making it better all the time. Making the database more efficient, improving certain parts of the UI, making it integrate better with other infrastructure components and service discovery mechanisms and so on.
A personal lesson I took from Prometheus is that even if you have the best tech in the market, in the ecosystem, and I'm obviously biased here, but I strongly believe that this is true. Even if you have the best tech, that's not enough. There's so many other aspects to success, and it needs a complete mix of not just the technology, it also needs adoption drivers, it needs public speaking, it needs a healthy community, it needs other projects which you can ally with and work together with. It's never about one single person or one single project. It's an ecosystem of communities.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed watching the film as much as we enjoyed making it. And as we discussed in the agenda, we have with us now Chris Anderchuk, CTO of CNCF, who was really instrumental in helping make this movie and bring it to production and conceptualize and bring the whole idea to the forefront. So, Chris, thank you for taking a little bit of time to join us today. What are your
Awesome to
thoughts
be
on the
here.
movie? Yeah. So, what did you think of the film?
So, I personally, I love this whole kind of medium of communicating how open source projects came to be in a professional manner. So, knowing a lot of these individuals personally and kind of seeing the story play out was just great. I think we need to do more of these types of things. And, obviously, the Kubernetes documentary that kind of preceded this one was super successful. And we're seeing a lot of great feedback from everyone there in this kind of wonderful story.
Yeah. And so, we didn't get to put you in the movie, although I think we were trying to, but we had Alexis there representing CNCF, and he talked a little bit about how Prometheus came into CNCF. And I know you were really instrumental in that as well. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about how you came across the project and what that kind of, that process looked like when they came into CNCF.
Yeah, so as people know, Kubernetes was kind of born and inspired by a project called Borg, at Google, and there was a sister project called Borgmon, right, that eventually inspired Prometheus. So I was aware that people were trying to come up with kind of that missing piece that didn't really exist in kind of the Kubernetes and open source ecosystem, and I think it was. Literally, I think Julius mentioned this in the documentary. It was like, they posted something, open source a project, and eventually someone posted something on Hacker News. And eventually that's kind of how I came across it first and kind of played with it a little bit. And was like, oh, okay, kind of cool. And on kind of, moved on to my day. And then eventually, I think this is like late 2015, Alexis was basically thinking about what other projects do we need in CNCF for this whole ecosystem to be successful, because Kubernetes on its own is freaking an amazing piece of technology, but once you're starting to deploy services, you need to monitor them, you need to observe them, you need to ensure they're secure. And so obviously observability was kind of a missing piece. And lo and behold, we kind of got connected. The Prometheus team discussed of what it kind of would look like them joining, and they kind of went through the process as our second, project in the foundation, and it was just a natural like peanut butter and jelly fit with both Kubernetes and Prometheus, overall. So, and I definitely have to give a lot of kudos to Alexis for kind of driving a lot of that initial thought process and bringing the Prometheus team into CNCF.
Yeah, I didn't realize how close the symbiotic relationship was until I saw it in the film there a bit, and was just like, wow, kind of and I couldn't believe I hadn't thought about that sooner.
Yeah, you saw that little graphic. It was like K8S and P8S, like this whole like funny logo things. But yeah, all goodness, and definitely the Borg and Borgmon relationship and Kubernetes and Prometheus relationships are kind of sister. Or they're inspired basically by each other. So
yeah, and that seems like part of their kind of secrets to their success. I mean, it's the second largest project by code commits in CNCF right now. Did you think it was ever going to, did you expect it to be this big? And like, what do you think has sort of helped with their velocity? Like what has been their secret sauce?
So I think part of it, one kind of cool thing about Prometheus, I don't know if you've ever had like experience setting up kind of old school monitoring systems, right? It was a huge, in the early days, we had things like Nagios, which was like super popular, but a huge pain in the ass to kind of set up and install and deal with. Prometheus eventually kind of, came around and flipped a script on a lot of things. One, with Prometheus, you got a simple binary. Like simple binary you could run, very easy to set up and kind of configure via a simple configuration file. Golang was also kind of a modern language, which made it a little bit easier to contribute. There was none of this crazy, like you had to have agents on every machine to kind of collect data and forward them to, the observability system. Prometheus kind of flipped the script by having this pool kind of model instead of like classic, like have an agent on machine and it pushes to the central thing. Prometheus flipped it by having this kind of pool model, as long as you had a standardized interface that you kind of, come with. And, honestly, I think those two kind of things, like single simple binary installation with easy to use config, a pool model for getting metrics out of things, like Kubernetes and other systems, and then I think also it was fairly full featured. Like, you had something called Alert Manager where you could set up alerts, and it had a very clean user experience alerting that you would kind of get out of maybe a more commercial offering, and they just kind of had it all in one in a simple binary you can install. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons that it was super successful. I think also the fact that it didn't come from a traditional, observability vendor or, a vendor trying to sell something. This was just born out of, a couple engineers at SoundCloud that literally wanted to improve how they did observability in their company. So I think, that also helped kind of, them build something that, they initially didn't want to monetize. They just wanted to kind of build something useful and share it with the world.
Yeah, I mean, I was so happy when, it took us a little while to get permission to film at the SoundCloud offices in Berlin, but it was something we were really pushing for with that group. I think, as you may recall, just trying to get those shots on site and try to bring that original team back on site, even during even though we're kind of post-COVID here a little bit, there was still, they're not in the office that much. And there was you want to bring ex-employees back and you want to film at our offices. But it was so integral, and to your point, just having end users, you don't see that as much, especially back, right? Like now we see more, like with Backstage, we see Spotify, here we are 2020 with more end users bringing projects, but that was pretty rare, wasn't it, for an end user to bring a project like that and contribute?
For sure, and part of it was, a lot of companies, at least back in the day, had very tight controls around what what employees could share when they work at a company, and so that has slowly changed over time, and I think CNCF has been instrumental in kind of sharing these stories of successes with open source software coming from end user companies, helping these companies, legal departments and engineering leadership coming up with more efficient processes on sharing things. And I think if you kind of look at it at the end of the day, open source innovation could truly come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from a Google or a large vendor. It could come from a SoundCloud, a Spotify, and a small startup out there solving interesting things. And it's just great that we're kind of enabling the sharing of software and knowledge into this huge public corpus out there that everyone could kind of learn from each other. Is just been awesome. I'm super kind of thrilled that we were part of that journey and truly helped the Prometheus project grow into something that I think literally people don't understand how almost every new type of service or product out there that has observability somehow built in generally exposes a /health or some kind of endpoint that Prometheus could scrape. That's truly kind of standardized across the industry. It's truly remarkable in many ways.
I mean, I didn't realize that either until we really started doing the film, and then you look at the impact it's had and you're just like, wow, this is bigger than just what you could imagine. And I think that's part of what is so great about the documentary, is just trying to share that story a bit more, especially with people who may not be familiar with the project or don't know how it started, what the landscape was like before Prometheus, which is pretty wild. And that, I guess, brings me
for sure.
To my last question. So I know you don't have your crystal ball, but we're getting close to the end of the year here. Prometheus is already the second biggest project in CNCF. I don't think it's going to overtake Kubernetes just yet, but what do you see here as the future? Where does the project kind of go from here? How do you see it evolving and so forth?
Yeah, so I see a couple, or maybe a few things happening. One, there's an effort that's currently going on in Prometheus is, yes, every system out there, like I mentioned, almost supports Prometheus, the exposition format as through a metrics, endpoint. That's not really an official standard. It's more of a de facto standard in many ways. It's just everywhere. There's a lot of interest in kind of making that blessed format actually an international standard, right? Whether it's through the IETF or ISO. So I think you're just going to kind of see that eventually, happen. And that to me is definitely a sign of kind of like maturation and success, even though like currently as we speak, it is basically a de facto, standard. Other things that are kind of cropping up are there's actually now a lot of products out there that are offering managed Prometheus. Like Amazon has a managed Prometheus service. Google, I believe, has one also. And so there's a desire to build kind of a conformance effort out there to ensure that there's consistency across these different hosted offerings. So for example, in the early days of Kubernetes, we were very concerned about fragmentation, right? Like, oh my gosh, people are going to fork Kubernetes and every cloud's going to have their own Kubernetes and it's going to be different and it's going to break workload compatibility. Some of that fear exists on a minor level in Prometheus where, hey, maybe a cloud provider, product breaks PromQL compatibility. So to me, conformance programs are another sign of like a maturity when it comes to a project, and there's some development happening in that space. For folks that did not attend the last PromCon, which is the Prometheus conference, I highly recommend checking out some of the videos where they kind of discuss some of the work going on in conformance. The other thing that I kind of see is there's a whole, I would say, layer above Prometheus with like things like projects called Cortex and Thanos, which are other CNCF projects, which basically work on scaling Prometheus. I think one of the reasons Prometheus is actually super popular is that like it's a single binary that's really meant to run on one machine. That's great for most developers, but if you're like trying to build a service or like actually scale the thing to support massive workloads like some people have, you need some type of like clustering, sharding type technology. And so I think in the future, you'll probably see some of these efforts out there like Cortex and Thanos, there's actually others out there, maybe merge into one project and maybe even become part of the Prometheus project itself. In some ways, because these things kind of have matured. So I think you'll potentially see that happening. But overall, I think they're in great shape and truly one of our success stories in CNCF. And honestly, some of the friendliest folks that I've kind of met in the early days when we were bringing in Prometheus and the CNCF. I actually had Julius Falls, one of the creators, stay at my house for a week where we just kind of chatted and he showed me some demos and the idea, like just like great, like down to earth people that like truly want to just kind of help the state of observability in the industry.
Yeah, they were just phenomenal to work with, and I just love that they trusted us with this film and be able to share their insights with us. And it's been great. Well, thank you, Chris. I mean, talking about insights, it's always a pleasure to just hear from you and just get your insights. And I know the community enjoys it. And it was a nice way to sort of wrap up this webinar. So we want to just thank everybody for watching and for listening. Really appreciate you making the time. Hope you love the film. As I mentioned at the beginning, like we're hoping our next film is going to be Envoy at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in Amsterdam in 2023. So we hope you'll join us there and show up, and we appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.